Councilmember Lindstrom's cat was making a second motion, but we're recognizing Lee. And with that, no other correction or discussion. Bridget, you may call the roll.
Councilmember Barber.
Aye.
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Gonzalez. Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren. Lilligren. Lindstrom.
Aye.
Muse.
Aye.
Sterner. Sterner. Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Zarin. Zarin.
And aye, the minutes are approved. So let's just jump into our first information item. This is the monthly update from the Metro Transit Police Work Group. And I believe to start us off will be Councilmember Chambliss. Rita?
Yes, thank you. This is our Metro Transit Police Group work group update that we do on a monthly basis.
We might be getting a little connection issue, at least I am, with Riva's picture and voice.
Yeah, same here.
You're still there, Riva? All right, maybe while Riva is reconnecting, I might suggest that Leslie, if you're here, you might want to take us through the slide deck, if you wouldn't mind, and we'll hear from Riva whenever you can reconnect.
Chair Zelli, yes, I would be happy to at least get started, and as soon as Councilmember Chambliss is back, I can turn the floor back over to her. But to get started, next slide, please. As Councilmember Chambliss was saying before she was cut off, this is the monthly update that the police work group brings to the full council. That was baked into the business item that established the work group to make sure the council remains fully abreast of what's happening in the work group. So just like we have in the past, today's update is really to just give you all a sense of what topics have been covered since the last update, and also give you a sense of what's coming up next. Next slide, please. So the group has met twice since the November Committee of the Whole. The November 19th meeting was completely focused on interactions with youth and youth experiences on the system and with Metro Transit Police. The December 3rd meeting was focused on data governance and accountability. In both cases, these were topics that were part of the work group's work plan, which was built back in September, really founded on some of the key ideas that emerged from the Citizens League review, as well as other topics council members raised as being topics of interest for this process. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, and I actually have a typo on this slide, so I apologize for this, but I should say on November 19th, the police work group meeting heard presentations related to interactions with youth. So this meeting was kicked off by just a refresher on the Citizens League engagement process, which deliberately and intentionally reached out to youth to make sure their perspectives were part of the deep engagement work going on. Some of the themes that were raised as part of that included the fact that youth reported feeling watched, sometimes feeling targeted, that others perceive them as a potential threat or otherwise disruptive to the system. And so some of the engagement really reflected those experiences as told to the Citizens League through their engagement. So once the work group received that grounding, that refresher on the engagement findings, the work group also received a presentation from the police department, in particular the investigator whose role is wholly focused on working with youth and investigating cases relating to youth, provided the group with a sense of the process followed when youth are interacting with police, a brief overview of some of the policies specifically related to working with juveniles and minors, and also a sense of the youth outreach that the police department conducts, some of which has been curtailed due to COVID, but the police department is in the process of filling their youth outreach coordinator and continues to work to develop positive interactions with youth as part of just broader community and 21st century policing principles. And finally, part of the youth focused meeting also delved into our student pass program. Part of the concerns that I know we've heard are students that use Metro Transit to get to and from school may report different safety concerns than students who rely on yellow buses to get to school. So the work group heard from Metro Transit staff who work directly with schools on the student pass program, work closely with the schools to coordinate schedules, to provide information on our code of conduct and expectations, so students and parents have that information, but also to address student safety concerns at specific locations in close coordination with the school districts. We also had two guests from the Minneapolis Public School District to talk about the student pass program from their perspective. Both the director of emergency management, safety and security for the schools, as well as their student engagement coordinator, were able to speak to the work group about some of the experiences Minneapolis public school students have riding Metro Transit, and really kind of their side of how this partnership works for Minneapolis. Next slide, please. And then
go on,
yeah.
I'd like to ask if there are any questions or comments about that overview with interactions with you. I am not seeing any, so I think we can go on. Thank you.
And Chair Zelli, Councilmember Chambliss, I can pause here and turn it back to Councilmember Chambliss if you prefer. I was asked to step in while the connection was being addressed, but.
Oh no, go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, I'll keep going then. But yes, please interject. Anybody interject at any point in time. So the other meeting that the work group has had since the last committee of the whole was the December 3rd meeting, really focused on data governance and accountability. And as part of this work group meeting, the work group heard from Metro Transit Strategic Initiatives Department and the Metro Transit Police Department on the various sources and types of police data that we keep and collect and maintain and analyze here. Strategic Initiatives also spoke to how Metro Transit has developed key performance indicators around policing to have a sense of policing performance based on goals established. The police department spoke to how every week they look at CompStat reporting to understand trends and really get a sense of what's happening in our region and how the police department can effectively respond to issues. And this presentation was really designed to kind of start setting up the final phase of the work group's work, which is going to be identifying recommendations for outcomes and data that the council wants to see on a regular basis to really provide that degree of accountability over transit safety, security, and policing issues. So the work group talked briefly about really this relationship between setting outcomes and goals and identifying data, both quantitative and qualitative data, to help assess how we're performing to those goals. And as part of this, the consideration of equity and disparities too, and making sure that when considering data, particularly if we're talking about quantitative data, we're really looking to just aggregate data and analyze it in a way that would allow us to understand if there are any desperate or disparate outcomes. Next slide, please. So this is language that comes directly out of the business item that created the work group. This was language that the work group looked at as part of this December 3rd discussion about data and accountability. And again, is really part of transitioning to the final phase of work of moving from doing these deeper dives into topical areas to taking and really synthesizing that information to develop recommendations. And just as a reminder to this group, the work group was asked to report back to the full council by the end of February with recommended transit safety and security outcomes and strategies recommended to achieve those outcomes. And as part of this, there's also a requirement to identify data and other forms of information that the council will expect to see on a regular basis. So again, just wanted to put this language in front of this group as we think about how the final stages of the work group's work will move forward. Next slide, please. So kind of this slide is a slide you've seen before. We just keep adding topics to it, but just to give you, again, a sense of the ground that the work group has covered thus far. Again, several of these topics, the work plan was really built off of that deep engagement that happened during the Citizens League work and additional ideas and concerns raised in council meetings and through other forums. So again, like the work group is getting at a point where we're going to stop adding new topics to this list, and instead they will pivot and really start focusing on developing those recommendations. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this Friday's meeting in a moment, but this slide again is just to kind of remind you of where we are in the process. The December 17th meeting will be focused on this public comment opportunity, and then the group will move into the final phase of developing recommendations. The December 31st meeting has been rescheduled to January 4th, but it means the meetings in January and the meetings in February will really be focused on, again, really digesting all the information covered to date and writing those recommendations. And as this slide shows too, just like we have been doing up to this point, the work group will continue to provide monthly updates to the committee of the whole to ensure the full council is well aware of where the work group is headed and where this process is going. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this Friday's meeting really closes out that kind of second phase of work of really collecting ideas and information. The full meeting on Friday will be devoted to public comments. And there are a few different ways people are able to participate in this. They can sign up directly to make comments during the meeting. If they choose, they could also or instead record a message that as time allows will be able to play during the meeting. And we also have received a handful of written comments to this email address, which is another way people can contribute to this public comment process before the work group really switches into focusing on developing recommendations. And I'll just mention that while this is just one meeting devoted to public comment, it's important not to lose sight of the Citizens League's engagement that really set up this process. The number we've been using is about 1,000 people participated in some form or some element of the Citizens League work. So the work group's work really started from what was learned through that really robust process. And this open forum on Friday is just one more opportunity to check in with people and see if there are additional topics, concerns, ideas that people want to share through this avenue to really supplement what was learned by that earlier engagement. Next slide, please.
I'd also like to reiterate that we did on November 5th, we had employee perspectives, so they were also able to chime in during that meeting, as well as we were able to hear back from the other groups that interact with Metro Transit Police and our staff.
Yes, thank you for adding that. So this final slide is actually a slide that was shared with the work group at the December 3rd meeting, and is really geared to making sure that as staff, we're adequately supporting the work group members as they prepare to develop recommendations. But we wanted to share these questions with all council members too, and the first two are probably more applicable, but really wanting to just take a moment to touch base to see, are there is there additional information needed about some of the topics you saw in that earlier slide, that even though we might have covered them in a meeting or provided information to the work group on them, perhaps we haven't gone deeply enough as staff and we need to be providing more information on those topics. There's also the second question, if there were additional topics that were not part of the initial work plan, but have become really salient or really important for this group to hear about before they start developing recommendations. If there's an opportunity for us to bring that information to the work group, we certainly want to try to do that sooner rather than later. So the idea today was just to end with these questions to see if either work group members or any other council member wants to share some thoughts about additional information that needs to be covered before the final phase of developing recommendations commences. So with that, I believe that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Leslie. Are there any questions or feedback? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Will the video link be put on the website soon for Friday's meeting so people can watch along?
Leslie?
Or is it just a recorded meeting that people can access later?
Chair, Councilmember Johnson, the short answer is no, you can watch live, and that information should be part of the agenda that's posted. I'm not sure if Bridget Toski wants to jump in and explain in more detail where that is, but all of these meetings are open to the public. When the agenda is posted, there's information about how to join the WebEx. So this meeting was noticed back on Tuesday, so it should be there. And again, I would welcome Bridget to jump in if there's some more detailed information.
It is there. It is
Okay.
there. Just I didn't, and I think probably Greg puts the link up maybe right before the meeting to make it go live. But I just wanted to make sure that people could watch them, because I'd probably like to watch the meeting. I'm not on the committee, so I wouldn't be included in that link, I guess. But it'd be nice to just listen and hear firsthand some of the comments that are made. And then, Madam Chair, just my second question, are we really pushing this out so people know about it? It's a busy holiday season, but just making sure that we continue to get as much of a wide net cast across the region for people to share their comments.
That's a good question, and I see that Michelle Furay is also on this as a panelist. Can you speak to how it's being communicated?
Absolutely, Madam Chair and council members. This has been really widely publicized. We included it in all of your council member newsletters, and those go to, if I had to count, well, several thousand people. We also put it in our newsletter, our regular newsletter. We did some promotion on social media. We've been getting a lot of sharing of it. So the word is getting out, and we're hearing from people, which is really good. It might not be like, hundreds of people, but we're definitely hearing from people who are engaged. We've also reached out to some of the partner agencies who have been participating in this process all along, and they are organizing people to comment as well. So it's getting good traction, and we have definitely made sure that the word is getting out on this.
Any other questions? Councilmember Gonzalez and then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Hi, thank you very much. This is a question that I had from the first presentation that I saw about the results of the polling or the consultation with the rank and file police officers, in which about 40% of them said they felt quote unquote not supported. Um, and what I would like to have is a little bit more information or context as to what exactly they mean, or why they feel this way. Do they feel unsupported because they don't have the equipment, or the adequate pay to compensate them for their services? If there's anything that the council can do on that, and I would definitely like to know. On the other hand, I would also like to know if they feel that they're, again, quote unquote, not supported. Is that because of their experience with the community at large? If they feel that the common citizens or the folks that they interact with them are not supporting the police department, again, why is that so? And what exactly is community support looks like? I hope that they don't mean that they're not supported because they're being held accountable for their behavior when they interact with the community. I hope that it's not because people are complaining when they see something that they feel shouldn't be done by a police officer. That's not being supported. If that's what they mean by being not supported, then I think we have a problem. Um, and the not being supported should also not mean that the culture of the force is being looked into, or that they're being scrutinized by their performance. That's again not being supported. That's us doing our job. So I would just like clarification on the state of mind and the reasons why the police feel this way. So thank you.
Those are really good questions, Councilmember Gonzalez. I saw the survey information results, and the survey information results did not indicate to me that it was due to perhaps criticism that officers or employees may have received. It's more of it was more internal feedback about our operations and the Met Council as a whole. But we do have those survey results that would be reviewed when we get to looking at our recommendations and reviewing the feedback from all of the groups, from the Citizens League, as well as from the meetings that we've had and have captured that information. Leslie, do you have any other perspectives to provide?
Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, I think you covered that really well, and certainly we can look through the comments of this survey and just really try to see if we can get a deeper, more qualitative understanding behind those numbers.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Thank you. Is that sufficient, Councilmember Gonzalez?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. I was just curious about the conversations with the with youth or with the youth groups. Anything really surprised the work group members? Things that you hadn't heard before, things that really stood out, things that surprised you is really my question.
Well, it was a continuous process. We heard from school administrative staff. We heard from youth groups, and we talked about the importance of making sure that students were safe when they get on the bus and when they leave, and that the importance of having on-time, reliable bus service so that students can get to their destinations quickly, on time, and safely. That was really important, and coordinating with school staff was really important as well, and understanding what the students' needs were. That stood out to me. Leslie, did you or Michelle have anything else that popped out? Again, that's information that we can review from the feedback and look at when we look to make recommendations going forward. And it's not going to be just, one look and then we're done. I think these continued conversations with all stakeholders that come into contact with our staff and that we come into contact with is really important going forward. Any other questions? Comments? I don't see any at this point. So thank you for listening to our update, and there will be more to come at the next Committee of the Whole meetings, as well as the public comments, and you're welcome to attend that on on December 17th.
Thanks, Councilmember Chambliss, and Leslie and everybody in the work group who's been helping shepherd this along. This has been quite a journey, and I know that there's been the thirst for some additional public comments, so good luck with that session coming up, and we'll look forward to the next report. Now we're going to hear from a program that I think has gained great admiration, both within the council, from our stakeholders. The Star Tribune, Cameron Bailey has become kind of our rock star, but is joined by Barris Gumastas, and take it away.
Good afternoon, Chair Zeli and council members. My name is Barushka Mishdaz, and I'm a senior researcher at the Community Development Division. And today I'm here along with my colleague, Cameron Bailey, to give you an update on the Community Development Division's Solar for Vouchers program. Cameron previously presented to the Committee of the Whole to introduce the program to council members. And since then, we had a chance to implement the program, and we would like to provide you a status update. I will kick off the presentation by reminding you what this pilot program is about and why it was initiated in the first place. I will describe how the program works and what the specific of the goals of the program are. I will then talk about our efforts to generate interest in the program. At that point, I'll hand it to Cameron, who's going to present some of the lessons we learned during the implementation process. Cameron will also discuss the program outcomes before he finally summarizes the next steps. Next slide, please. The Solar for Vouchers pilot program is a technical assistance program designed to serve two different purposes. The program offers free technical assistance to commercial rental property owners so that they can adopt solar energy in their buildings and reduce their energy costs. The rental property owners can take advantage of this free technical assistance program if they rent some of their units to the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program participants. So the Council collaborates with commercial rental property owners. We give them technical assistance. They offer rental units to our voucher holders for 5 years. Next slide, please. So why did the Community Development Division develop this pilot program? As you already know, Metro HRA administers the largest Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program in the state of Minnesota. Unfortunately, it has historically been difficult for voucher holders to find rental units. A prospective voucher holder who cannot rent a unit within 120 days of receiving a voucher loses the opportunity to participate in the program. In 2019, only 56% of our program participants who received a voucher were able to rent within this timeline. To put it more bluntly, nearly half of our voucher holders lost their vouchers because they could not find units to rent. The Community Development Division saw an opportunity to help voucher holders by providing solar technical assistance incentives to rental property owners who agreed to rent more units to our voucher holders. In other words, the Solar for Vouchers pilot program leveraged the division's solar technical assistance capacity to address the housing needs of the region's low-income residents. Thrive 2040 explicitly states that expanding the housing options of the region's low-income residents is an important component of promoting equity in the region. This pilot program promotes equity by helping low-income voucher holders find affordable housing. Thrive 2040 also states that promoting the adoption of renewable energy sources is a key tenet of another important Thrive outcome, sustainability. This pilot program moves the dial towards sustainability by helping rental property owners adopt solar energy. The pilot program also supports two important council strategic plan priorities, housing and sustainability. The program serves the region's low-income families by giving them access to affordable housing. It also promotes the adoption of solar energy, as I mentioned before. Next slide, please. Now let's turn to how the program works. Please don't worry about reading the individual boxes. I will walk you through the 5 steps of the program. The 5 green boxes on the top part of the slide represent each of these steps. The blue and gray boxes under each green box shows the actors involved in each step. So let's start with step 1. This step involves recruitment of commercial rental property owners. The council advertises the program and invites applications. Property owners apply by providing the technical specifications of their buildings so that the council can confirm eligibility for the program. The properties of the applicants make up a large portfolio that could garner group purchasing advantages. In step 2, the council works with solar developers. Solar developers are the firms that install solar panels on the buildings. During this step, the council invites solar developers to bid on the portfolio of properties that are candidates for solar installation. The council runs a procurement process where it vets the solar developers. It identifies a select number of solar developers that offer the highest quality products at the most competitive prices. Just to clarify, the council does not hire any of the solar developers, and it does not enter into any contractual relations with them. As a third party, the council simply screens the solar developers on behalf of the property owners and acts as a matchmaker between the property owners and the solar developers. In step 3, the council works with its nonprofit technical assistance partner, Clean Energy Resource Teams, and we do so to provide technical assistance to the property owners. This is the step where the council and its technical assistance partner work with individual property owners and walk them through the ins and outs of the process. They help them to coordinate site visits. They guide them in evaluating contracts. They assist them in exploring solar financing options. Finally, they help them with choosing a solar contract that best fit their needs. In step 4, solar developers and property owners work with each other. With help from the council and our technical assistance partner, property owners choose one or more solar developers and sign a contract with them. Once the contracts are signed, solar panel installation begins. Currently, our program is at step 4. Property owners have been working with us and our technical assistance partner to identify the contracts that best fit their needs. Some of our participants had already signed their contracts, and others are in the process of doing so. Finally, in step 5, the council, and specifically Metro HRA, works with property owners to place voucher holders in the identified rental units. If their properties are located in the service area of a public housing authority other than Metro HRA, then the council works with property owners to place these voucher holders in their units. Next slide, please. Now let's look at the specific goals of this one-year pilot program. When we envisioned this pilot, we hope to enroll 5 to 10 landlords. The number of rental units each property owner commits to voucher holders depends on the size of their properties. Property owners reserve a larger number of rental units for voucher holders if they have larger buildings. Assuming moderately sized properties, we anticipated that working with 5 to 10 landlords would probably yield around 75 to 100 rental units. Finally, we hope to enroll 2 to 3 solar developers in the pilot program. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we had to do in the program was to generate interest in the program. In fact, we had to do that while we were still designing the program. So we had developed and implemented a strategic communications plan, which helped us market the program to potential applicants. We presented at workshops, we sent mass emails and made phone calls. We had coverage in local newspapers and stations, TV stations. We had advertised the program by marketing through solar and housing industry newsletters and networks. Now I'm going to hand it to Cameron, who will discuss the impacts of our marketing efforts, the program outcomes, and some of the lessons we learned during the implementation process. He will conclude the presentation with a summary of our next steps. Thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, many thanks, Baresh. And is audio good? Excellent. Thank you and good evening, council members and chair. And thanks for teeing us up, Baresh. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay. Alrighty. So that's everything we put together to generate the interest. Question being, what was the impact of those marketing efforts? Simply put, we generated statewide and national interest. Our strategic communications plan worked really well. We were hoping to cover our own metro HRA service area and found that there's much more interest in the program beyond just that jurisdiction. So cities and housing authorities beyond the original scope of the program approached us from some of the agencies and municipalities you can see on the screen, including cities of St. Paul, Bloomington, Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, Plymouth Housing Authority, Minneapolis's, St. Paul's as well. And then our staff members from our technical assistance partner, Clean Energy Resource Teams, as Baresh mentioned, also let us know that there's demand for the program beyond the metro because they work statewide providing energy assistance across the state of Minnesota. And then finally, we had various agency staffers from the cities of Boston, New York, reach out to us and actually not just reach out, have extensive conversations with us to learn more about the program, how they could reproduce it, some of the lessons learned that we were generating. Because yeah, they wanted to take the program as it was before we even finished the pilot. So in terms of our marketing efforts, we absolutely nailed things on the head there. Next slide, please. Now looking at how that interest we generated, how that translated to the actual program itself. So we did have great interest from landlords and solar developers. We're going to work from left to right here on the screen. So initially we got interest from over 50 landlords, and we're defining interest as landlords either attended one of the informational sessions that we put on, or they gave us a phone call directly or submitted an email to us. So with that initial 2.5-month outreach and recruitment process, we got over 50 landlords who expressed interest in the program and over 10 solar developers. Of course, we wanted a big pool of interested landlords and developers because we knew that pool is going to shrink once we move to the next step, which was actually getting applications into the program. As you can see, the middle column, we went from that 50 plus down to 12 applications to the program and 2 solar developers. And then ultimately, after we ran through to see who was eligible for the programs and a good fit for the program, we ultimately ended with 5 landlords enrolled and 2 solar developers. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so seeing the initial goals we had for the program, the initial interest, I would hope it begs the question from you all, what happened between interest and enrollment in the program? 3 main things here, which you see on the screen, and we'll work from top down. First one being a lot of the landlords who were interested were actually ineligible for the program. Either they didn't have enough units for the program, they were outside of our initial geographic scope or service area for the program. The rental price points were too high for them to bring those price points down to be eligible for the HRA or Housing Choice Voucher Program. Or there were just non-suitable technical components to their property, such as the roof was too old, they didn't have the right sort of electrical service equipment, they didn't have a large enough energy bill to kind of justify the process. Now, we didn't view that as a bad thing because what we learned is there was much more widespread demand for the program than just the Metro HRA service area. We also learned that it wasn't just moderate to larger size multifamily properties where landlords saw a value in this program, because we had a lot of landlords reach out who had, as we said, too few units, so a lot of duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. And so what we had to do was kind of look in the mirror and say, how we designed this pilot isn't corresponding with the sort of demand we're getting for the program. So we shifted to that second part, which is we had to realign the program to be responsive to that surprise demand and interest in the program. And so part of that was changing our service area for the program, expanding some of the criteria for the program. And then, we had to turn things around quickly and remarket the program actually in the spring earlier this year, which kind of led to that third component, timing. So because we had a shift from really running outreach and communications, recruitment for the program from fall and winter last year, we had to push that actually into, or extend that into winter and spring this year. And so with that, we were starting to get into construction season. So a lot of landlords as well as solar developers actually had to pull out of the program, just didn't have staff capacity. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so kind of looking apples to apples for the goals we had coming into the pilot relative to where we actually ended up at. We wanted 5 to 10 landlords. It's really myself, Buddish, and a couple of our partners at CERTS really kind of part-timing a lot of this work. So we wanted a manageable size, 5 to 10 landlords. We ended up with 10 really high-quality, motivated landlords who are willing to invest their time in a pilot project. When we say 29 potential units added, that's because, as Buddish stated, we're still closing out the program in terms of getting final contracts executed for properties. But 4 of those 5 are still firmly and fully engaged in the process. A couple of whom have actually signed contracts already. So still moving forward, hopefully have a more comprehensive report out sometime next year. And then that bottom one, enroll 2 to 3 solar developers so we could have some honesty and competition and pricing from the solar developers, as well as a diversity of experience. And we ultimately did end up with 2 developers in the program. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so where we're at right now is we ran a pilot, right? So now we're exploring where we should go from this pilot. This slide we're going to talk, I'm going to talk you through, this is kind of how the pilot was laid out and structured. So if we're looking at that left column, those are kind of the roles and responsibilities of the program administrator, so Buddish and myself, where you lead on the recruitment and enrollment for the program, enrollment in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and then back-end tracking and evaluation. So taking a lot of phone calls, emails, a lot of presentations. The middle column, right after we get people enrolled, then we have to administer a request for qualifications process to bring on solar developers. That's also a role we filled over the summer. And on that back end, clean energy resource teams just being the consummate professionals and the best partners we could have asked for this program, and really heading up and coordinating those site visits and providing that solar contractual technical assistance to really build up the knowledge base of our landlords so they're confident in what decision they ultimately make on whether or not they sign a solar install contract. So that's how things are structured right now in the pilot. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so first place we're looking at in terms of where to go next, because we have heard from enough cities, housing agencies, developers, landlords, other technical assistance providers that this is a valuable program and people want to see it. So looking at a metro-wide rollout of the program, you'll notice only one square is different, and that changed from Met Council to nonprofit partner. And that's because for a metro-wide scale, with just Badish and I and a little assistance on the other side, with 5 landlords, it was a lot of work. So for a metro-wide rollout, that's a continually operating program year over year, really need more dedicated time for that role. So where we landed at, conferring with some of our partners, was let's identify a nonprofit partner that's already in the space of doing solar procurement, especially solar group procurement, and basically become partners in the administration of the program, where we still envision us as the council helping administer the RFQ process, and clean energy resource teams has confirmed that serving in the role they have to date be something they'd be happy to do, and very much aligns well with their mission. So that's where we're at right now. We're in conversations with 3 different potential partners to roll this program out to a metro-wide scale. Hopefully before New Year's, we'll see where that goes, but more than likely it'd be something that'll have to be fleshed out over the course of a lot of 2022. Next slide, please. Alrighty, second option, just go big, statewide. Demand's there. So the question is, how do we get the pieces and partners in order to support a statewide rollout of the program? And in that statewide program rollout, you'll notice is there's a difference in that central column for administering RFQ. So to administer requests for qualifications across the state, you just have to get such a broader diversity of developers in that you probably need to run multiple or differently segmented RFQ process. And for that, that's just much well beyond the scope of just the council. So similarly, finding a partner to really lead the administration of the program, also looking for a partner to carry forward a much larger RFQ lift, especially able to do that in an ongoing annual basis. This is a sustainability and housing affordability project, so we also have to have sustainability in how we're administering the program if we really want to realize long-term benefits to the region. Next slide, please. And this is bringing us to the tail end of our presentation. So those next steps, we're always actively incorporating lessons learned into our program design, reaching back out to our partners that we spoke with over the last couple of years and the design and build out of the program, and then getting feedback on that back end in terms of what we can change in the future. That's from landlords, that's from solar developers, that's from housing agencies, et cetera. That second component is, as we said, identifying new partners for a larger rollout, and not just larger, but a more sustainable program rollout. And that third part, got to get the word out there, right? So promoting the results, promoting the lessons learned, being honest about what worked well, what didn't work well, what surprised us, where we had gaps in resources that would have helped the program maybe run more smoothly, or looking in the future, that we would recommend would be much more helpful in a much more larger scale program rollout. And with that, we can go to that next slide, which opens the floor for questions. Thank you for having us here.
Well, thank you, both of you. We know that really good ideas might be good ideas, but it's the execution that really matters. And so that's on the two of you, and we really appreciate getting this update. What we always thought was a great idea, but now you've tested it. Let's open it up. Peter, you've been talking admirably about this for a couple of years. So.
I have. Well, I just wanted to say real quickly, Barish and Cameron mentioned clean energy resource teams, and that's, some of you may know, that's my day job. So I won't say too much about this to avoid any sort of perceived conflict, but I will make the hopefully not too controversial statement that it was a real pleasure to work with Cameron and Barish. They are the consummate professionals, and yes, hats off to you, to both of you.
I'll just jump in with a question. When we're looking at these partners, nonprofit partners or others, are they in the housing space? Are they more community-based organizations? Who are the likely subjects that you've been kind of targeting?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chair Zelli. Um, and it's one we went through for a few weeks with CERT staff and other partners. And where we landed at was, I think Badish put it really well, which is this is really a solar technical assistance program that leverages that assistance for affordable housing benefits. So we should really identify, especially for administrative partner, someone who's already in the solar technical assistance space. So because we're still in conversations with those entities, not gonna put their names out there, but I can.
That's fine.
Okay, they are in the solar technical assistance space in terms of doing group purchases, doing group discount bundles, and yeah, their regular practice being let's bring together a group of landlords, whatever that sector is, and bringing together a couple of developers that we pre-qualified to help buy down some of that risk. Let's do some education, and then ultimately empower the property owners to make a decision or not. And they do it on an annual basis. So potential really good alignment.
Right. Well, we have a few questions. Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Cameron and Bruce, this is fascinating. I'm loving this conversation. It's an area that I wish I had the depth that Councilmember Lindstrom and both of you have, but I would appreciate if there's ever an opportunity where you're having a meeting regarding this with the partners or others where it's appropriate and comfortable for us to listen in. I would love an opportunity to listen in. I think I'd learn even more. I have a nephew who's involved in the solar world, and he tries to explain things to me, and I think I frustrate him more than motivate him. But this is fabulous. I'd also be interested, and this doesn't have to be addressed tonight, but maybe going forward for committee of the whole discussions, I'd be interested in what further things we could possibly do as it relates to advancing our commitment to climate change with these types of projects, similar, dissimilar, but somewhat connected, and also what we can do to ensure that as we're getting folks into affordable housing, we're getting them into homes that are going to be resilient on a night like tonight. I've been watching too much of the coverage of what happened in Kentucky, and I have to say I worry about a lot of folks who live in, all of us who live in potentially vulnerable homes, but particularly those who really are vulnerable in so many ways, and for whom a disaster could be really just so life-threatening. So thank you again. This is fabulous.
Great. Councilmember Wolf, you have your hands up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was interested in hearing maybe more about how we can leverage more vouchers out of this, because you met your target on the number of landlords, albeit at the bottom of the target, and the number of solar providers, but the number of vouchers that were leveraged out of that was much lower than what you had hoped. Can you explain what we could do to get a better bang for the buck on how many vouchers?
Yeah, I love that, Councilmember Wolf. And that was something, yeah, Badish and I think Badish, you teased that out in your portion, where honestly, when we did this big regional technical economic analysis of existing multifamily properties against existing solar tariffs, tax credits, the whole thing, and looking at also landlords who had currently had solar installed at multifamily properties. And what we thought was that it'd be mostly larger properties, multifamily properties, talking like 40 units and up, that would be interested in this program, because that's what we saw most of. That was the profile of most landlords that did currently have solar installed at multifamily properties. And then when we ran the program, the majority of landlords we got were landlords with properties of more like 5 units, 10 units, 20 units. We had one property of 100, I think they have 167 units. So one really big one and another 45, 50 units. But the majority of our interest came from small properties. And so, not wanting to read into that too deeply because we haven't been able to do that follow-up intentional survey, but is it actually because those landlords are less resource in terms of their time that's available to them to do this ongoing education, or because they have less money or tax liability to leverage for these systems, especially since a lot of our interest from applicants who were ineligible were duplexes and triplexes. So we're talking about a lot of landlords with small properties, mom and pop property management companies. And so that was one of the big things we learned in the program, which is the interest was wide enough and had enough depth in those different segments of the housing market that really this program can be ran for entirely for different segments of the housing market itself, especially because the finances start getting wonky as you change housing class sizes. So that's definitely a lesson learned from the program. Like, let's probably a good idea to run it in a more intentional way. So one, expectations can better align with the reality that comes out in the back end. But then also something too, we realized in the back end, which is we did this during a pandemic. So people who were initially interested, other priorities came up. So wanting to acknowledge, that reality as well. But Ish, is there anything else you would add to that? I think condensing that simply, more targeted segmentation of the program, and being more responsive to those who are actually responding to the program rather than what we think will happen, being responsive to who actually shows interest.
Mr. Chair, a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Now I just lost what it was. On the going either region-wide or statewide with the program, has anybody considered talking with Minnesota Housing to partner on this? Because they probably have more staff than we do.
But if you wanna grab that one? Or...
Sure. That was actually our first thought as well. And we are communicating with them at the time. And I think they're interested, but they also told us at this in the short term, they have $500 million coming their way to have some assistance programs related to COVID. So for now, they're tapped out capacity wise, but they showed interest, and especially in year 2023, they intend to sit down with us and explore how we might take it to scale.
That's interesting. I was actually going to suggest the same idea, but as you scale this is which is I think the ultimate goal. Probably multiple partners, but my interactions with Commissioner Ho have been very similar. They have got their hands full. That maybe there's a future here. Any other questions, thoughts? Go ahead, Councilmember Fredson.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Exciting pilot from the standpoint of it addressing both huge challenges that we face, both on the housing front and on climate. I'm curious to know what requirements or safeguards might be in place as it relates to, are there incentives that developers would hire local workers to install the solar, or are we assured that folks will be paid living wages if they're doing this work? And I ask that question because as we make the transition to clean energy, up until recently, work on wind farms in southwestern Minnesota and across the state really relied on out-of-state workers, and I think in a lot of cases you had immigrants that were taken advantage of on the job, and we want to discourage the exploitation of immigrant labor. And I still think that's a challenge that we face on the solar front. So I'm just curious to know if you have an answer to that question off the top of your head, or I would just ask for a follow-up after the meeting.
Yeah, I appreciate that one, Councilmember Fredson. And Badish, I'd be interested to see how much time we logged on building out this. We built out a whole criteria section to address like what is the income disparity between your senior management and entry level staff? How are you paying your subcontractors? What does your business ownership profile look like across women, veterans, race, language? And then we met with procurement, and a barrier we ran into there is we don't have supporting council policies and how we structured this program to be able to require any of those things. And so because we can't require that, we also can't score or evaluate because it's not directed by council policy. And then, getting into the pragmatic thing, though I wouldn't say pragmatic, just another barrier is how to, that requires active tracking on the sites and with the subcontractors. I don't say it's pragmatic to say that's too hard, but rather point out that like that is difficult to do and does deserve intention and focus. And I wholeheartedly agree. We put money behind things that are valuable. So if we think that's valuable, we should put money behind it. But yeah, for the scope of this project, again, just lessons learned. We need policy, council policy to support that. With that policy and a broader coalition, seems like that's how money gets behind things, and that's not to say that's beyond the council, but that's council and many other partners got to get on board to get that aligned in the solar space, wind space, energy efficiency space in general.
Yeah, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think that's an important issue to flag for you, Chair, and fellow council members. I think the catalyst for the change in the wind industry in Minnesota was the Public Utilities Commission requiring wind energy developers to report whether or not they were hiring local workers. And I think it was a pretty broad definition of local workers, but at least we would get a pretty good lens of whether or not folks were being hired from Minnesota or surrounding states versus workers from Texas or Oklahoma or wherever else. And so I think that's a policy that we should certainly explore. Especially, my assumption is this program is going to be successful and we would potentially want to expand it moving forward.
Great comment and duly noted. Thank you, Councilmember Fenton. Councilmember Johnson, your box keeps moving around on my screen. There you are, Judy. I know you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of questions for you on this program and trying to find other partners. And certainly you've got energy partners lined up and, approaching Minnesota Housing. Have you thought about working with the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund or the Family Housing Fund? Greater Minnesota Housing Fund is statewide, has really good relationships with the multi-family housing group, especially those that are providing affordability, has and Family Housing Fund is in the metro region doing some of the same. They have resources that I think that they've acquired recently that are really working to preserve affordable housing. So even to preserve housing that has vouchers currently, so we don't lose them, but then also has those relationships to work with property owners and landlords that might want to expand. And maybe I'm sure you were very thorough in your outreach and clearly across the country, but approaching some of these partners where they might have some ins and ability, especially during COVID, to say, hey, this is something you should look at. I would just, if you haven't done that, maybe it's worth just, they're great. I know, I believe Councilmember Cummings is still on the board for the Family Housing Fund, and I used to work for a nonprofit where they both were on my steering committee. The other thing I'd like to say, it's really sobering when somebody for many months has a voucher and can't find the unit that they're looking for. And please, I should know this, and for some reason but if they don't find their voucher, they have to turn it back because they have a specified amount of time. Do they lose their place in line too? I just need that answered because does anyone have that answer?
Yes, they do. They do lose their spot in the program and the wait list as well.
Yeah, and I thought that was the case, but I wanted to, so think about it, right? You wait for years. You're one of many thousands that get placed on first a waiting list, then you get lucky to be put on the list, then you wait, then, you know, it's finally your turn, and then you end up in that situation. So this program should be commended, of course, and everybody working on it to help try and expand the vouchers. Obviously, that's the point. My only last point would be, you know, if you did get interested properties, but they didn't qualify for this certain incentive or program, can we keep them on a list and find out if there are other things that might help push them over the edge to add vouchers? If there's a willingness already, can we keep our eyes on them in a positive way to partner? Maybe they could give us suggestions on, well, what else would it take to help, you know, add some vouchers to the building that you own. That would be my only other question, because just finding willing partners is magnificent, right? Just the willingness. So I don't want to lose that interest if it might hang out there and show up in another way that we or other partners could harness in a really cutting edge kind of way that you guys are doing. I really am thrilled about your work and very proud that you're doing it as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. I'll grab the comment you just made. I know on the front end of this, we knew we needed to get a lot of people interested because the majority would not ultimately be eligible. And we had that same kind of discussion, like, but we want to keep them plugged in. Like, we want to be able to help them out with something. And so that's another reason CERTS was a really great partner to us, because they provide renewable energy and energy efficiency technical assistance. So like, all right, at the very least, we're going to plug them into who CERTS is, what all they do. CERTS can help with finding financing and technical assistance. But you're right, we absolutely kept that entire database with all that contact information. That feels like a different program that would be wonderful especially on the energy efficiency side of things. I know there's a few colleagues in environmental services and CD I've spoken to who really do understand the urgency of needing energy efficiency. So I love that idea. Absolutely. Yeah. And those two agencies you shared with us, I wrote those down. But Ish, I'll let you answer that one, because you're housing, I'm solar. So I'm gonna go Google these entities.
No, I think that you identified two good organizations. We were just thinking mostly in terms of scaling up statewide, and Minnesota Housing stood as the natural partner. But especially if we're going to scale this up on a smaller level, they would be great partners, and we will approach them to see what kind of partnerships we can engage with them, basically.
And Mr. Chair, just one quick follow-up. Thank you for making that comment. Appreciate it very much. And they have a big reach across Minnesota. They closely align in their work. They're divided regionally and statewide, and they work extremely closely with Commissioner Ho and Minnesota Housing. So where the state agency might not have the ability based on timing or resources or whatever it might be, because they have their hands full, awesome people doing awesome work. But you know, those nonprofits can be a little more nimble, have brought in private funding, can leverage public funding, and might be able to be a catalyst to some of this work as well, because certainly they would want to support sustainability and everything around affordability. So just a thought, they're pretty powerful entities doing really amazing work across the state.
Many thanks. You got my imagination going. So thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Chair Zelli, this is Councilmember Zarin.
Oh, go ahead.
I put my hand up, but you know, I had to leave there for a little bit. I ran and got a new charger cable, so I'm charged up enough.
Yay.
So I apologize for missing some of the presentation. So maybe my question has already been answered, but it kind of dovetails with Councilmember Fredson's question about workforce. Are there any questions or incentives that in this program that would support apprenticeship and workforce development in that way? And I guess I asked that question once before, and and maybe you already addressed it, and I'll just step back and listen. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks, council member. I remember you shared that with our last year when we presented, and we tried to address that in some ways through the criteria we built out through the RFQ process for workforce representation across different demographics, income disparity. And when we met with procurement, basically we don't have a council directed policy for that. But you are bringing to mind, if we're talking about scaling this as a larger metro or statewide program with other partners or entities, then that's something we should be thinking about and talking with others now about how to build that into a program. But I think also, yeah, coupling that with how we as the council have our own policies that support that sort of prioritization. So we're clear with our partners on what we're expecting from how the programs run. And Councilmember Johnson, as you just shared, maybe that's the benefit of bringing in other partners with more flexible, adaptable funding, is that that funding can get put behind some of these harder to get to things. But yeah, for this, the pilot, yeah, we're like scope creep, not gonna be able to do that. But now we're not talking about scope creep, we're talking about scaling. So it's the perfect time to start bringing in, all right, what are the other ways in which we'd want to make this a better program or the closest to the best version of itself that it can be. So fully taking that to heart in our very long lessons learned sheet. So thank you.
Thank you.
So when you look at the marketing page, it's a lot of cities and then Boston. But are these housing authorities or are these on the sustainability side? I mean, who's calling you and asking for advice? And I'm curious who that entity is in Boston, because it is a kind of a national story.
Yeah, for the City of New York, it was the Mayor Sustainability Office. That's who reached out there, and then Badish, I feel like you were leading more of the Boston stuff with your connections there. I don't remember who
Yeah,
to meet with.
they had some folks from the housing agency, and they have some folks from the solar universe as well. I think it's MAPC from Boston, some of their folks from the solar side, and some folks from the housing finance side. They both approached us, and they are trying to figure out a way to institutionally wed the two things, but they don't have the advantage that we have, because the council has both access to housing authority and we offer solar technical assistance. So they have to kind of work together to cement a partnership, which is not always very easy. And they get very jealous of our sort of semi-centralized structure here.
Yeah, that's right. Because
remarkable. You think about Metro Council, we could do that in-house, so to speak.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was like, with MAPC, that's their Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, and yeah, it's like my kind of solar proxy at their MPO.
Any other thoughts, questions, everyone? Well, honestly, Maurice and Cameron, again, there's a lot of interest, enthusiasm you can tell from us. And as you think about scaling or venturing out, just rely on some of us as council members for support if you need it. And we're very interested in hearing more about the progress. And unless there's any other questions, thoughts, everybody's safe inside. So they said, stay out of the storm. So with that, I think our committee of the whole can be closed out. Any other last comments, questions for anybody? All right. Well, our year is not done. We're going to see you all at least next week, but stay safe. And again, thanks for these reports, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you,
This meeting
everyone.
is adjourned. Thanks.